Your conflict and your rage are like smoke from a fire that you can trace back to the altars that you have erected in worship of a false idol. Your intimate conflicts ultimately come from idolatrous cravings. St. Augustine said that emotions like rage or bitterness, they function like smoke from a fire. You can follow the trail of smoke back down to the fires in your heart, and they're usually fires that you have built in worship of a false idol. When you see smoke in your house, the last thing that you want to do is just get rid of the smoke. If I come home and my living room is filled with smoke, I don't say, whew, kids, open the windows and turn on the fans. No, more important than getting the smoke out of the house is figuring out what is causing that smoke. More important than learning to control your rage and your anger. Some of you have learned all kinds of coping techniques. More important than that is figuring out what's causing it in the first place. So just ask yourself, where are you bitter at your spouse? Where do you rage at a boss or a child or seethe toward a friend? They may be at fault. They may genuinely be at fault. But the rage and the bitterness point to a deeper problem in you. At the end of verse 2, James says, you do not have because you don't ask. Pray. Your first problem, he says, is that you've made the wrong person responsible for your needs. You're looking to somebody else to supply something that really only God can supply. Your horizontal conflicts come because of a vertical disruption. You don't trust God here, so you rage here. All right, this is about to get really deep. You ready? Heard a Christian teacher present this question one time this way. Has it ever occurred to you that what you crave, you're not getting because you're trying to squeeze it out of somebody who doesn't have it? Has it ever occurred to you that what you crave, you're not getting because you're trying to squeeze it out of somebody who doesn't have it? You want control. You want respect, you want significance and satisfaction, you want approval and belonging. What if the primary source of those things was supposed to be not your spouse, it was supposed to be God, not your friends, not your boss, not a big crowd, it was supposed to be him. And now you're looking to somebody else to give you what only he can give you. Has it ever occurred to you that what you crave, you're not getting because ultimately you're trying to squeeze it out of somebody who doesn't have it? I've told you before that many people approach marriage like a person drowning in a sea of loneliness and despair, or a sea of low self-esteem. And they see a marriage partner come along like a life preserver who can save them from all of those things. Here you got a guy drowning in life. He's got all kinds of emotional dysfunctions. He's completely unhappy being single. He's miserable. He's lonely. He's purposeless. He's wandering, he's unhappy. He cannot imagine being happy or feeling complete in his life as a single man, even if that's God's will for him for a while. And as he is drowning in this ocean of purposelessness, along by floats a 5'2" blonde-headed life preserver with beautiful eyes and a gray body. So what does he do? He clings to her and he sucks the life out of her. And when she disappoints him, or lets him down, which she inevitably will, he rages at her. What if she was not designed to supply all of those things? Here's what I've learned after 23 years of observing marriages in this church. Lonely, insecure, single people in Raleigh and Durham become lonely, insecure, married people. In fact, they usually get worse. If you are unhappy as a single person, you will be unhappy as a married person, because that spouse cannot make you happy, because problems like loneliness and insecurity are not cured by another human being. They're only cured by the love of God. They cannot give you that sense of identity or security or significance or approval. They can't meet all of your needs. They weren't designed to. And here's the thing, when something you idolize disappoints you, you demonize it. You rage at it. Remember this, whatever you idolize, one day you will demonize. Has it ever occurred to you that what you crave, you're not getting because you're trying to squeeze it out of somebody or a group of people who just don't have it? I've sometimes said that I wish when I'm doing a marriage ceremony that I could take a Sharpie and draw on the forehead of both spouses before they walk down the aisle a little sign that says, will not support the weight of your soul. Like one of those signs you might see in front of a bridge in a rural area that says max 2 tons, which means you can drive your bike across this bridge, you can walk across it, you might be able to drive a Prius across it, but if you try to drive a dump truck across this bridge, it will crumble and you will end up in the creek. This bridge was not built to support that kind of weight. Marriage can be a wonderful addition to your life, but it cannot meet the deepest needs of your soul. And if you depend on it for that, it will crumble underneath you. Has it ever occurred to you that what you crave, you're not getting because you're trying to squeeze it out of somebody who doesn't have it? Y'all, that's true not just in marriage. I'm merely using that as an illustration. That's true in any relationship. So again, let's go back to that first question. What is it that I want badly enough in my life that I am willing to yell at, tune out, abuse, or neglect to get? Those things point to the presence of an idol, and that's your real problem, James says. Now, y'all, that by itself will be enough for us to think about for the rest of the day, rest of the week, maybe rest of the month, right? We can just close the Bible and go home, thinking about how terrible we all are and how worthy we are of all those names that James calls us. But James, as we would expect, is not done. James sees us doubled over in pain, and so he decides, oh, now it's time to twist the knife a little further. So he says, verse 3, remember we ended verse 2 by saying you don't have because you don't ask. Now he says, verse 3, but actually you ask, you pray, but you still don't receive because you ask wrongly to spend it on your passions. In other words, you've tried to turn God into a genie who exists to fulfill your covetous passions. Then he says, verse 4, you adulterous people. Now, this is an interesting and honestly quite disturbing metaphor. James says, some of you do ask God to meet your needs, but he's not answering you because you're praying like an adulterer. So pray tell, you ask, how does one pray like an adulterer? Well, think about it. What is adultery? Adultery is when one spouse finds certain delights in somebody else that they ought to be finding in their spouse. It's not that the desire for romantic or sexual intimacy is wrong. It's that desiring it with this other person is wrong because I've already covenanted it with somebody else. You are not enough for me romantically and sexually, I am saying to her. I need somebody else. Spiritual adultery is when you find the happiness and security that you ought to find in God. You find that in something or someone else, or you seek it in something or someone else. Adultery in the Bible is always a metaphor for idolatry. Spiritual adultery is when we look to something or somebody else for what we should be finding in God. Does it make sense? Praying like an adulterer means asking God to become complicit in your idolatry. It means praying with the conviction that unless God supplies this thing that you're asking for, you could never be happy or content in life. And God says, but you're supposed to be happy and content just trusting in me and resting in my presence and in my will for your life. Imagine if a man said to his wife one night over dinner during their date night, hey, when we got married, when we said our vows, you promised to fulfill my romantic and sexual needs. And so I have a request. She's nervous. She's like, I don't quite remember it exactly phrased like that, but go on. And so he proceeds to tell her that he is determined that what he needs to be romantically and sexually fulfilled is for her to arrange a sexual liaison with her friend so-and-so. That date night is not gonna end well, am I right? If a man actually did that, it would be heartbreaking to his wife, right? She would say, when I made that vow, I meant I myself would be your romantic and sexual fulfillment, not that I would be your pimp to arrange that with other people. When we ask God for something and our happiness and our contentment and our emotional equilibrium are dependent on him giving us the answer that we are demanding, that is, we could not imagine being happy without that thing we're asking for, we pray like an adulterer. Do you see that? Because we are seeking a happiness, a contentment, and a security in something that we ought to be finding in God. God, I need this raise. Because God, without this financial raise, I can't be happy or satisfied. I won't be secure. I won't have a great future. There's nothing wrong with the request for a raise. The problem is that you've made your happiness and contentment dependent on getting it. Oh God, please fix my spouse. Please fix him. Please fix her. Make them more attentive to my needs. Nothing wrong with the request. What's wrong is that you think you'll never live a full, happy life until they're different. God, I need to make this team. I need to get this award. God, I've got to get into this school because I can't feel good about myself unless I do. God, I need a boyfriend, or I need a girlfriend, or God, I need to get married because without marriage, I won't feel complete in life. And God says, you adulterer. You're asking me to supply in somebody else what you ought to be finding in me. You should be able to be happy and content and complete with me. It's not that you shouldn't have those other desires. They're fine. It's that you should still be able to be content with me and not covet those things. Your anger, your rage at others, and really first at God, James says ultimately, goes down to idolatry. Your conflict and your rage are like smoke from a fire that you can trace back to the altars that you have erected in worship of a false idol. Your intimate conflicts ultimately come from idolatrous cravings. Your intimate conflicts ultimately come from idolatrous cravings. So what's the solution? Y'all, what's the solution? Before I tell you what James says the solution is, could I just point out one of the things that I love about James is that he does more than just tell you that you got a problem and then call you a bunch of nasty names and then tell you to go fix yourself. No, he diagnoses the problem, showing you the problem behind the problem, and then shows you how to fix that problem at the source, which is so much more helpful than a lot of the other diagnostic instruments in my life, right? Like the little check engine light in my car. Could I just rage about that for a minute? My second daughter just left for college. She's a freshman now at NC State, so I inherited her car back. And when I got into it to drive it for the first time in a long time, I immediately noticed the check engine light was on with a little illuminated wrench underneath, which prompts two questions. Number one, how long has that thing been on? Number two, check what about the engine? Clearly it's telling me to take a wrench to something, but what? So being obedient, I dutifully pull the car over, I open the hood, I stand in front of the engine to check engine. And my first thought standing there is, man, there's a lot of stuff in here. But here was the most frustrating part. There's no tiny flags waving with a little arrow pointing to something saying, twist wrench here, twist wrench here. Within moments, I had determined beyond any reasonable doubt that the level of the windshield wiper fluid was fine, okay? I even glanced around the engine for dead animals. Checked fans for dead little rats, if you remember from last week. Even sniffed a little, right, just to see, right? And then, well, that's all I knew how to do. It said check engine, I checked engine, and then confident that I'd done whatever it was telling me to do, I got back into my car and went on my way, right? Ultimately, I'm taking somebody else to get them to check the engine. James is much more helpful than that kind of indicator light. In verses 6 through 10, he gives you a number of instructions about how to deal with your idolatrous heart. Number of instructions, but I think I can summarize them in two basic categories, okay? Here's category number one. Humble yourselves, verse 10. Humble yourselves, verse 10. Humble yourselves before the Lord, and he will exalt you. In context, these verses like these are often lifted out of context. In context, humble yourselves means two things. There'll be an A and a B. A, humble yourselves by acknowledging that there may be good reasons God is withholding from you something that you desire. That's the first place you humble yourself. Psalm 84:11 promises us that no good thing will he withhold from those who walk uprightly before him, which means if it is truly good for me, God will not withhold it. He will supply it. No good thing will he withhold, and if he does withhold it, that can only mean it must not ultimately be good for me at this particular time. You are mad because you thought you needed this, and that person is not giving it to you. But humble yourselves that you may not know what is best for your life, and a sovereign God is guiding your life, who promises that no good thing will he withhold from those who walk uprightly. I thought I needed the marriage. I thought I needed the win, the raise, the acceptance, the contract, the healed body, but you didn't give it to me, God. So you must have a better plan. This week I was listening to an old talk by Elizabeth Elliot. She was the missionary whose husband, along with 4 other young missionaries, was speared to death along the beaches of Ecuador in the 1950s. In this talk, she said that the hardest thing to do is to trust God when his plan goes 180 degrees opposite the way that you thought it should go. Have you been there? She and Jim, her husband, had trusted God with their relationship when they were dating. When they graduated from Wheaton College, they were in love. But they waited 5 years to get married because they both felt led to serve God on the mission field in 2 different places. She in Africa and he in South America, and they sensed this so strongly, they knew it meant they had to wait on getting married if they would ever get married at all. So they waited 5 years. Eventually, God led them back together and they got married. They were married for 2 years, less than 2 years, when Jim was speared to death, taking the gospel to this remote tribe there in Ecuador. She said the night before, Jim and the other 4 men left to make this initial contact with this very hostile tribe, they had all knelt down, they had prayed, and she said, we ended our prayer time by singing a hymn that had the words, "We rest on thee, our shield and our defender." And then the next day, Jim left in obedience, and God, his shield and defender, let him be speared to death. Elizabeth Elliott asked this group of college students in this talk that I was listening to, she said, will you trust God when he leads you there? Will you trust your shield and defender when he lets the spears penetrate your chest? Then she said, because God is God, he is worthy of my trust and obedience. Therefore, I will find rest nowhere but in his holy will, that is unspeakably beyond my largest notions of what he is up to. Humility. God's got a different plan than me, and when his plan goes 180 degrees opposite of what I want or where I think it should go, I'll trust him. I'll trust him, and when it doesn't make sense, I'm still gonna trust that Psalm 84:11 is true, that no good thing is he withholding, and if he's withholding it, it must not ultimately be good for me.